We've been last several weeks going over how to pray, and specifically the last couple of weeks talking about physical healings, that churchianity as a whole concentrates on praying for physical healings. You know, when you hear somebody's sick, the first thing is, well, I'll pray that God will heal you. And what we've been going over is that God is not, He may not physically heal people at all today, but if He does, it's certainly not His focus, and physical healing has never been His focus. Even when Jesus was on earth and did the physical miracles, that Jesus was still concentrating on spiritual healings, as we've seen. And so today, if you go to the book of Mark chapter 8, there are a few passages that are taken by churchianity to support the idea that God physically heals people today. And so we're going to look at, there's chapter 8, chapter 9, and chapter 10 have these passages that we're going to look at. So what I'm going to do is, we only have 45 minutes, so I'm going to start in Mark 8, and we're just basically going to get an overview of these three chapters, specifically concentrating on the passages that I mentioned in the email that people use to say that God still physically heals today. But by going through these chapters, then we can learn what those verses really mean. Because what churchianity will do is they'll just take the verse out of context. Like they'll take, Mark 9 and verse 23, if thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. So they'll take a verse like that and try to say that, well, if you have faith, then all things are possible. So if you've got a physical ailment, then God can heal you. So, but by going through the verses, rather than just taking a verse out of context like that, then we should be able to understand what these verses really mean. So we're going to start in Mark 8. I wanted to start in verse 10 because this is really going to give us the context of what it's talking about. And what we're going to see tonight, I'll give you a spoiler alert, what we're going to see tonight is what we've seen in previous nights, is that when Jesus did the physical healings, His emphasis was on the spiritual. So these verses that churchianity take out of context and try to apply to physical are really referring to spiritual healings. Mark chapter 8 verse 10 says, and straightway he entered into a ship with his disciples and came into the parts of Dalmanutha. And the Pharisees came forth and began to question with him, seeking of him a sign from heaven, tempting him. Notice it says tempting him. A lot of times we think, if Jesus was doing the miracles today that He was doing back then there would be so many more believers. But here, the Pharisees ask Him a sign from heaven, not so that they believe, but to support their unbelief, to tempt Him. Tempting Him, Jesus says over in Matthew 4, when the devil tried to tempt Jesus. In fact, go over there and you can see what that means, the tempting Him part. In Matthew chapter 4, when the devil tempted Jesus, these three different temptations, in verse 5, in Matthew 4 verse 5, then the devil taketh him up into the holy city, and setting him on a pinnacle of the temple, and saith unto him, if thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down. For it is written, He shall give His angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. Jesus said unto him, it is written again, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. So, basically, what the point of this is, there's another point involved, but basically for our discussion tonight, the point to get out of this verse is that you don't just cast yourself down for the sake of a miracle. In other words, you don't seek a miracle just for the sake of a miracle. When Jesus healed people physically, he didn't just do it just to give them physical healing. The reason was to show them a sign of what God wanted to do with them spiritually. So in this case here in Matthew 4, the devil is trying to get Jesus basically to tempt the Lord, to basically cast himself down and see if the Lord would really fulfill his promise. There was no purpose behind casting himself off the temple other than seeing if God would perform it. And Jesus says, no, I'm not going to do that, because it is written, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. So going back to Mark 8, when you see in verse 11, when the Pharisees began to question him and seek of him a sign from heaven, tempting him, what that tells you then is the Pharisees are in unbelief. Jesus did physical miracles as a sign that his message, that the gospel of the kingdom that Jesus taught was true. So he would preach the gospel of the kingdom, he'd perform a physical miracle, which showed the people in the audience that he is of God, the gospel of the kingdom message that he taught is true. Therefore, they should believe it based upon the sign that they just saw of the physical miracle. But if they are seeking a sign from heaven, that's a different situation. Here, they're seeking it, tempting him. It's not so that they may believe. They're not asking for a sign so that they may believe, because it says that they were tempting him. They are in unbelief, and they will continue in their unbelief regardless of what he does. Hold your place there. Look in Mark chapter 4. Because where we are in these, when we're in Mark 8, 9, and 10, is the religious leaders of Israel have already rejected Jesus as their Messiah. And so that's why you get these verses that you do referring to spiritual healings. In Mark chapter 4, Jesus has already been rejected by the Pharisees. Back in Mark 3, there is, you can see in Mark chapter 3, verse 22, the scribes which came down from Jerusalem said, he hath Beelzebub, and by the prince of the devils casteth he out devils. So, in Mark 3 already, the scribes or the religious leaders have already said that Jesus is of the devil. He hath Beelzebub, and by the prince of the devils casteth he out devils. And so then in Mark 4, and he starts speaking in parables for the first time. And the disciples ask him, why are you speaking to us in parables? And Jesus said in verse 11, Mark 4:11, he said unto them, unto you, that's the believing remnant of Israel, unto you it is given to know the mystery of the kingdom of God, but unto them that are without, the ones who are outside of the kingdom, that's apostate Israel, the ones who have already rejected Jesus as the Messiah, saying that Jesus has a devil, he is of the devil. So unto them that are without, all these things are done in parables, that seeing they may see and not perceive, and hearing they may hear and not understand, lest at any time they should be converted and their sin should be forgiven them. Now we'll get into that a little later today, what he means there. But I wanted to read that so you can see, then going back to Mark 8 now, the Pharisees have already rejected Jesus as the Messiah. They say he's not of God. They say he's of the devil. So when they ask for a sign from him in Mark 8:11, they've already seen him doing miracles. So that's why it says in Mark 8:11 that when they seek of him a sign from heaven, they are tempting him. And in verse 12, he sighed deeply in his spirit and saith, why doth this generation seek after a sign? This generation is the generation of vipers, children of the devil, apostate Israel. That's who he's talking about here. Verily I say unto you, there shall no sign be given unto this generation. He already gave physical miracles, signs to the nation as a whole. But once the religious leaders showed that they are not of God, that they have rejected those signs. They've rejected Jesus as the Messiah. They rejected the signs, rejected the gospel. They said he's of the devil. Then what they did is now they have shown themselves to be of the generation of vipers, or they are children of the devil. So he's saying to that generation, the unbelievers, there shall no sign be given. We saw from Mark 4 that Jesus does try to help out the believing remnant. There are two generations. There's the generation of Jesus Christ, those who have believed the gospel of the kingdom. They're the little flock, the believing remnant. And then there is the generation of vipers, the children of the devil, apostate Israel, the religious leaders. So they've now, by this point, separated into two groups. And so Jesus started teaching in parables in Mark 4 because he's still teaching the believing remnant. But to the unbelievers, apostate Israel, he's not going to teach them. He doesn't speak plainly so that when they hear, apostate Israel hears, they don't understand. When they see, they don't perceive it. So he speaks to them in parables, okay? But to believing remnant of Israel, he's still trying to get them into sound doctrine and get them to believe. So he says, regarding apostate Israel in Mark 8 verse 12, there shall no sign be given unto them. And he says it's really an adulterous generation. It doesn't say that here, but in other places he says an adulterous generation seek after a sign. Let me get you the Matthew passage that says that. Let's see. Matthew 16. Look at Matthew 16. And you can see the same. This is really a parallel to what we just read in Mark 8. Mark gets to events earlier than the other Gospels. Mark's only 16 chapters, and Matthew's 28. So this is a parallel here. Matthew 16, verse 1. The Pharisees also with the Sadducees came, and tempting, desired him that he would show them a sign from heaven. So same thing there, tempting him. He answered and said unto them, when it is evening, ye say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and lowering. O ye hypocrites! They're hypocrites. They say they're of God, but they're really of the devil. Ye can discern the face of the sky, but can ye not discern the signs of the times? He's already given them signs. They should already be able to discern it. But because of their unbelief, they don't discern. And so he says in verse 4, a wicked and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign. And there shall no sign be given unto it, but the sign of the prophet Jonas. And he left them and departed. The sign of the prophet Jonas is that Jesus would die, would be buried, and raised from the dead the third day, just like Jonah died in the belly of the well, and on the third day was spit back out. Basically rose from the dead there after 3 days. That's what he's talking about. But in terms of a miracle or some kind of sign to show that Jesus is of God, at this point, Jesus is not going to do that for apostate Israel, for the unbelievers. He is only going to try to help out believing Israel and get them into believing. That's the key to understand. Going back to Mark now, that's the key to understanding these passages that people take out of context to say God is going to physically heal us today. So, going back to Mark chapter 8, so we saw from verse 12, there shall no sign be given them, because they're an adulterous generation. Now Mark 8, verses 14 through 21, Jesus is going to warn his disciples, because remember, he's only concentrating on getting sound doctrine in the inner man of the disciples. You can't get sound doctrine into, like they say, you can't get blood out of a turnip. You can't get sound doctrine into the inner man of unbelievers. So he's concentrating on getting sound doctrine in the believing remnant, the disciples, and also to increase their faith so that they won't be in unbelief. And we'll get to that in a minute as well. And so now that he's told the Pharisees that he's not going to give apostate Israel a sign. Then he turns to the disciples, and in Mark 8:14 through 21, warns them to not listen to the Pharisees, not to listen to the false doctrine of those religious hypocrites in their midst. You see, in verse 15, Mark 8:15, he charged them, saying, "Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." And that's referring, now it doesn't tell you there that that's referring to the doctrine, but if you go back to Matthew 16, which was our parallel passage, the same thing is said there. And it's explained what that is. In Matthew 16, verse 11, Jesus tells his disciples, "How is it that ye do not understand that I spake it not to you concerning bread, that ye should beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees?" Then understood they how that he bade them not beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees. So going back to Mark 8, so we saw first in Mark 8 verses 10 through 12, the Pharisees tried to tempt him to get a sign. And Jesus says, "I'm not going to give you, generation of vipers, wicked and adulterous generation, children of the devil, I'm not giving you a sign. I'm only concentrating on the little flock." So then he goes back in Mark 8:14 through 21 and tells the little flock, his disciples, don't listen to the doctrine of those religious hypocrites, the Pharisees, Herod, the Sadducees. Don't listen to the doctrine of the religious leaders. It's false doctrine. So now you get down to verse 22. And this is the first passage I was going to cover. It's the blind man here who is healed. And it takes 2 times, Jesus touching him twice before he is healed. And so what churchianity will do is they'll take this out of context and they'll say, well, you see this blind man. This is what they'll say. This blind man had a little bit of faith. So when Jesus touched his eyes, he could see a little bit, but he couldn't see clearly. But then, so then when that happened, then his faith was increased. And so then he had more faith, so now he had the faith to be healed. And so they'll use that to say, if you've got a sickness or an ailment, you just pray to God for him to heal you. And if you get a little better, maybe the next day, well then, maybe you've got a little faith. You just need to keep praying and keep earnestly seeking God and making sure that you're not trusting in man and you're not doubting. If you have faith without wavering, then God will heal you finally. That's what they'll use this for. But in the context, that's not what it's talking about. Mark 8:22. He cometh to Bethsaida, and they bring a blind man unto him, and besought him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand, and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes, and put his hands upon him, he asked him if he saw aught. And he looked up and said, I see men as trees walking. After that he put his hands again upon his eyes, and made him look up, and he was restored, and saw every man clearly. And he sent him away to his house, saying, neither go into the town, nor tell it to any in the town. So, churchianity wanting to promote the idea that you need to pray and really not waver in your faith. We use this and say, that blind man, he had a little bit of faith, but he wavered. He was doubting. And so then he really had to trust the Lord here and not doubt. And so then the second time he was healed. They'll use something like that. But that's taking it out of context. That's not what's going on. Remember the issue here. And as we go through Mark 8 and 9 and 10, we'll see. The issue is the faith of the disciples to believe the doctrine that Jesus has given them. That's what we're dealing with here. So remember, just before this, in verses 14 through 21, Jesus warns them, don't listen to those religious leaders. They've got, remember what we talked last week about, over there in Matthew, it said, if you had the faith of the grain of a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, be thou removed, and it would be removed. And we talked about how what that means is that they were not believing in Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection that Jesus had taught them, that he would have to die, be crucified, and rise again the third day. And so as a result then, they couldn't cast out a devil. And the faith as a grain of mustard seed to remove the mountain is that mountain of religion. That apostate nation had them under their hold of unbelief, where they were hypocrites using the Bible. And so the disciples thought they were believing God, but they were really believing the religion of the Pharisees. And so that's why, because of their unbelief in what Jesus, they believed the religion of the Pharisees, which said that the Messiah will come and bring Israel into the kingdom right away. They did not teach Jesus or the Messiah would have to die, because they figured they were good enough. They were self-righteous on their own. So the disciples believed what the Pharisees taught regarding the Messiah rather than what Jesus taught. So they were in unbelief regarding what God said, and as a result, they couldn't cast out that devil. So Jesus says you need to have faith, believing God and His Word over religion, and then you will be able to cast out that mountain of religion. That's what we talked about last week. And so here you've got the same situation. Mark 8:14 through 21, the disciples are believing in religion. And Jesus has to tell them, beware of the doctrine of the Pharisees and of the doctrine of Herod. Don't listen to that. Don't follow it. And then you have the miracle of the blind man. Now, let's hold your place there and go over to Luke. Luke in chapter 4. Luke chapter 4, you've got Jesus beginning His earthly ministry. And I want you to see what He does is, when He goes into Nazareth, into the synagogue, He reads from Isaiah 61 verses 1 and 2. And He says, this basically He's announcing to Israel, this is my ministry. This is what I am to do now that I'm at my coming as Messiah. This is what I'm to do. So, verse 17, Luke 4:17, Jesus in the synagogue in Nazareth, there was delivered unto him the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because He hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. Matthew says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. These are the people who are poor. The poor in spirit are those who are not self-righteous, who are not proud or rich in spirit, saying, look at me, I'm going into the kingdom on my own. But if they're poor, they're like that publican who prays, smote his chest, and wouldn't even look up to heaven, and prayed to God, be merciful unto me, a sinner. That's the poor. So He preaches the gospel to the poor. We're talking about spiritually speaking here. Whether they have money or not, it doesn't matter. Zacchaeus had a whole bunch of money, but yet Jesus saved him, gave him the gospel, and he believed, because even though he had a bunch of money, he was poor in spirit. So God hath, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because He hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, and that's a spiritual thing. To preach deliverance to the captives. That's a spiritual thing as well. Isaiah 49 verse 25 says, Israel was Satan's lawful captive. So, deliverance to the captives means that Jesus is going to ransom Israel from Satan, the one who is stronger than Israel. Preach deliverance to the captives. And recovering of sight to the blind. The blind is spiritually speaking. The reason that He heals blind people physically is to give Israel a type of what God wants to do for them spiritually. Recovering of sight to the blind is spiritually speaking. Remember we read what Jesus said in Mark 4? He says, the reason I speak unto them in parables is that seeing, they don't see. They see with their eyes physically, but spiritually they don't get what I'm talking about. Why? Because they are blind, spiritually speaking. They give you a passage to demonstrate that. Look over in John. Hopefully I can find this. John 7, I want to say. Maybe it's John 9. It's John 9. The end of John 9. Verse 39 through 41. John 9, 39 through 41. John 9:39. And Jesus said, For judgment I am come into this world, that they which see not might see. So if you're spiritually speaking, Jesus came, he doesn't say to physically heal people, he's talking about judgment. So it's a spiritual connotation. For judgment I am come to this world, that they which see not might see. So spiritually they can't see, but God opens their eyes spiritually speaking. And that they which see might be made blind. That's talking about apostate Israel, who says, we know how to get to God, we're doing good okay ourselves. He says, I'm going to bring them sound doctrine, which contradicts their false doctrine, to show that those which see might be made blind. Some of the Pharisees which were with him heard these words and said unto him, Are we blind also? See, the Pharisees got it. They figured out he was talking spiritually speaking. That he had come, Jesus had come to give sight, meaning the poor in spirit who would believe the gospel of the kingdom would now have the spiritual sight to see the things of God, while you've got the blind, or the Pharisees, say they know God, say they know how to get to God, but Jesus is going to show them that they're really blind, spiritually speaking. And so in verse 41, Jesus said unto them, If you were blind, ye should have no sin. But now ye say, We see, therefore your sin remaineth. So basically what he's saying there is, if you weren't self-righteous, you would recognize you're blind spiritually. You're a sinner. So then, you would have no sin because you'd believe the gospel and you'd be forgiven of your sin. But because you now say, We see, you're self-righteous, therefore your sin remaineth. So, the blindness, going back to, where were we? Luke 4. Luke 4:18. When it says, Jesus has come that they would have recovering of sight to the blind. That means, spiritually speaking, physically, yes, there would be blind people who were healed. But that's not why he came. Remember, he's concentrating on the spiritual. He preached the first thing in Luke 4:18. It says that the Spirit of the Lord is upon him to do is preach the gospel. And when they believe the gospel, then the brokenhearted are healed, the captives are delivered, and then there is sight given to the blind. And then it says, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. So that was Jesus' ministry. But the problem is, he cannot give recovering of sight to the blind completely due to the apostasy of the nation as a whole. So Israel, as we saw there in John 9, the apostate Israel says, we see, therefore they are blind. So Jesus, spiritually speaking, is going to try to take those who are blind, spiritually speaking, which would be the believing remnant of Israel, and give them sight, because they recognize being blind is the same thing as saying, I'm a sinner. And seeing is the same thing as, I've got eternal life. So, believing Israel recognizes their sin. They recognize they're blind. So now Jesus is trying to get them to see. And remember, Luke 4:18, he was sent to recover sight to the blind. But his ministry is hampered by apostate Israel. He's not going to be able to give full sight to the nation of Israel as a whole at his first coming due to their rejection. That's why after Jesus rises from the dead and ascends to the Father, then it's up to the little flock with the Holy Ghost given unto them to go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel then. And so that they may recover sight to the blind. The Holy Ghost has to continue Jesus' ministry through the little flock due to the apostasy of Israel as a whole. But of course, Israel still doesn't believe, and now dispensation of grace starts. So going back to Mark 8 then, since we are in the context of apostate Israel has rejected Jesus, and the believing remnant believes Jesus, but only to a certain extent. They're still fooled by the doctrine or the leaven of the Pharisees. So the 2 times here of healing the blind man is a type. It's showing that it will take 2 comings of Jesus before the blindness, recovering a sight for the blind, takes place. Some people will believe, the little flock, not many, but some will believe at Jesus' first coming. And then they have to go through the tribulation period. And then when Jesus comes back the second time, then all the lost sheep of the house of Israel are saved. So that's why it says, going back to Mark 8, verse 22, he cometh to Bethsaida, and they bring a blind man unto him, and besought him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. Now, why would he do that? Because, look over in Hebrews 13. Because the nation as a whole rejected Jesus as their Messiah. Jesus is, you have to come out of the religious system of Israel in order to come to Jesus to be saved. John the Baptist was preaching in the wilderness. He preached in the wilderness because Jerusalem, apostate Israel, had a stronghold on Jerusalem. He couldn't preach there. The religious leaders were there. He had to go outside to the wilderness. Hebrews 13, verse 11. Hebrews 13:11. For the bodies of those beasts, whose blood is brought into the sanctuary by the high priest for sin, are burnt without the camp, or outside the camp. Verse 12, wherefore Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people with his own blood, suffered without the gate. Jesus was crucified outside of the city limits of Jerusalem, outside the gate there. Let us go forth therefore unto him without the camp, bearing his reproach. For here have we no continuing city, but we seek one to come. So, John the Baptist went outside Jerusalem, preached. Jesus was crucified outside of the city. And Israel, here in Hebrews, is told, we need to go outside the city. We need to get out of that religion. That camp there is that religious, false religious system of Israel. We need to get out of that and go to where Jesus is. So going back to Mark 8, what the significance is, I mean, you think about it. You've got a blind man in Bethsaida. He can't see. He asked Jesus to heal him. You would think he'd just go ahead and heal him right there. But he's doing this as a sign. Remember Mark 4? Jesus said to his disciples, I want to make sure you understand the sound doctrine, but I don't want the apostate Israel to understand. Look at Matthew 7. Look at Matthew 7. Matthew 7, verse 6. Matthew 7 and verse 6, Jesus says, give not that which is holy unto the dogs, neither cast ye your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn again and rent you or tear you up. Jesus says, if I've got something holy, I'm not going to give it to a dog because it won't be holy anymore. If I've got pearls, I'm not going to put it in front of pigs because they'll trample my pearls, they'll destroy it. Jesus says, I'm not going to give the mysteries of the kingdom of God, sound doctrine, the mysteries of God's kingdom, I'm not going to give that to apostate Israel. They're dogs, they're swine, those are unclean animals in Israel's program. He says, if I give it to them, they're just going to trample it. People aren't going to be saved. People aren't going to come into the knowledge of the truth. I'm only going to give sound doctrine to my believing remnant, the believing remnant of Israel. And so he starts speaking in parables. But he also does his miracles, because remember, going back to Mark 8, verse 11, the Pharisees are there, and they wanted a sign, and he says, I'm not going to give you a sign. Only those who have the eyes to see and the ears to hear are going to understand this miracle here in Mark 8. So what he does is, he's trying to show them in a miracle form how Israel will not be saved until the second coming. So first, he takes the blind man, and in Mark 8:23, leads him by the hand and led him out of the town to show you there is no salvation in Jerusalem or in the apostate Israel religious system. You have to go outside the camp. You have to be a Bible believer, not a religious person. And then it says, and when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands upon him, he asked him if he saw aught. So that's showing that Jesus did something to try to give him sight. That's a type of how Jesus gave, like the Sermon on the Mount, for example, and gave other things to Israel so that they may see the things of God rather than looking at the flesh and their religion. Verse 24, and he looked up and said, I see men as trees walking. So that's a type there of at the end of Jesus' first coming. Jesus did come to recover sight to the blind. And they did get some sight. They did believe him in some respects, but they still had that mountain of religion. Remember we talked last time, the way that you remove that mountain of religion is by fasting and prayer. And we said that that happens in the last half of the tribulation period because they don't take the mark of the beast. They're not able to buy or sell. And so then they don't have food that they can eat. And so it's only by going through the great tribulation that Israel finally believes God and gets rid of that mountain of religion and becomes Bible believers. But at that first coming, they were looking for their Messiah to bring them into the kingdom because they thought they were self-righteous. And so they believed Jesus, but they didn't believe that he would have to die on a cross. Even the disciples, when he's arrested, all the disciples forsook him and fled, Matthew 27 says. So he looked up and said, I see men as trees walking. That's a type of Israel, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Some of them are saved, become believers in Jesus' first coming. But it's going to take the ministry of the Holy Ghost through the little flock, the believing remnant, during that tribulation period before all the lost sheep of the house of Israel are saved. And that salvation comes at the second coming. So then verse 25 says, after that he put his hands again upon his eyes. So that's the second coming. First coming, he spit on his eyes. Second coming, he put his hands again upon his eyes and made him look up, and he was restored and saw every man clearly. So finally, at Jesus' second coming, that's when all the lost sheep of the house of Israel are saved, and they see things clearly, spiritually speaking. And then in verse 26, he sent him away to his house, saying, neither go into the town, nor tell it to any in the town. And we talked about that last time, where, again, don't cast your pearls before swine. Don't cast that which is holy before dogs. Jesus is saying, don't go into the town and tell this, because I'm not going to give a sign to that wicked and adulterous generation who has already rejected me and says I'm of the devil. So don't tell them this. This is only for the believing remnant of Israel here, so that they may understand that at my first coming, they still haven't believed me completely. They think they believe me, but they've got that mountain of religion, that apostate religious system that has been built up in them that's still with them. So then now, you get down to verses 27. So Jesus is going to test them. And that's why he says in verse 27, the end of the verse, whom do men say that I am? Verse 28, they answered John the Baptist, but some say Elias, and others one of the prophets. He saith unto them, but whom say ye that I am? And Peter answereth and saith unto him, thou art the Christ. So, Jesus is testing to see, are they listening to the leaven or the doctrine of the Pharisees, or are they believing him? So he says, okay, well now I at least know that you think I am the Christ. So that's good. You at least recognize that. Verse 30, he charged them that they should tell no man of him. Isn't that interesting? Aren't we supposed to go out and tell people that Jesus is Christ, that Jesus is God, that Jesus died for our sins? Well, yes, we are today, but then the nation of Israel is apostate. They've already rejected him. Don't cast your pearls before swine. Don't give that which is holy to dogs. So he charged him, don't tell anybody that. At least I know that you know that I am the Christ. So now he's going to give them, build upon that. The sound doctrine, you already know I'm the Christ. So then verse 31, and he began to teach them. So now he's going to teach them of his death, burial, and resurrection. You know that I'm the Christ. Now I'm going to tell you what the Christ needs to do. The religious system says the Christ would come, overthrow the Roman government, and set up Israel, God's kingdom on earth with Israel. They didn't address the sin problem. Jesus says, you've got a sin problem. I've got to die for your sin before I can set up the kingdom. Your religion didn't teach you that. So now he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected of the elders and of the chief priests and scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he spake that saying openly. And Peter took him and began to rebuke him. So Peter understood, thou art the Christ. The disciples understood that part. But they didn't understand that he would need to die, be buried, and rise again. So that shows you exactly what happened with the blind man. At Jesus' first coming, they see vaguely, spiritually speaking. They see men as trees walking. But it's not until the second coming that they see clearly, 100%, 20/20 vision. And that is demonstrated here. They understand, Mark 8:29, that Jesus is the Christ. But they don't believe that he will die, be buried, and rise again. Thou art the Christ, but I'm not going to believe what the Christ tells me, because what the Christ tells me goes against what I've been taught by my religion. And so Peter rebuked him. And verse 33, when he had turned about and looked on his disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, Get thee behind me, Satan. Again, Peter isn't Satan, but he's listened to doctrines of devils. He's listened to the children of the devil, apostate Israel, and their false doctrine. So he says, Get thee behind me, Satan, for thou savorest not the things that be of God, but the things that be of men. And when he had called the people unto him with his disciples also, he said unto them, Whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself, and take up his cross and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it. But whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the gospel's, the same shall save it. For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Whosoever therefore shall be ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation. We heard something similar. This adulterous and wicked generation. We saw that in Matthew 16 verse 4. Talking about Pharisees. So here they are. The disciples are there. The Pharisees are there. Jesus is there. And he's warning the disciples that you need to believe what I say. Don't be ashamed of the sound doctrine I'm giving you. Forget about the Pharisees. Yes, they have political power. And yes, they could kill you. They're about to kill Jesus. All the disciples, I think, except for John, was killed. They all didn't die of old age. They were killed by other than natural causes. In the tribulation period, Revelation 20 says, I see the souls of those who were beheaded for the testimony of Jesus. So he's warning them that you need to believe me and God's word over what the religion system of Israel says. They have the political power, so they may be able to kill you. But what does it profit you if you get all the riches of the Pharisees, but yet you go to hell? Isn't it better for them to take away your riches on this earth, but then your soul is saved because you believe the gospel here and the doctrine that I've taught? So, I guess I was a little ambitious thinking I would get through chapter 10, huh? Probably everybody on here knew better that there's no way he'll do that. So, in summary, we'll close here with Mark 8. But what you can see here, at least we got through one of the verses, as you can see what they're doing in Mark 8 is you've got Jesus talking to the little flock in parables, and then he's also doing it through miracles that are veiled so that they are not a sign that the Pharisees can easily discern, and only those who believe can discern it. And so he says, so he wouldn't give a sign to the Pharisees, verses 10 through 12 in Mark 8, Verses 14 through 21, Jesus warns the disciples not to listen to the doctrine of the Pharisees. Verses 22 through 26, he shows that while Jesus' ministry was to recover sight to the blind due to the apostasy of Israel, that will take two comings, that Israel as a whole will only see little bit. They'll see men as trees walking. And you can see that demonstrated in verses 27 down through verse 34, they believe, the disciples that believe in remnant understand that Jesus is the Christ. But they won't believe everything he said. They won't believe he will die, be buried, and rise again the third day, because they're still hanging on to their mountain of religion. And so then he warns them in verses 34 down through 38 that in order to be saved, in order to get into the kingdom, you can't be ashamed of the words of Jesus in the midst of this adulterous and sinful generation. They may kill you for standing on my words. But as Jesus says in John 6:63, my words are spirit and they are life. So if you want life in the kingdom, you better believe the words that I tell you. So that's Mark 8, and that explains the blind man. And next time, I guess we'll cover Mark 9 and the phrase, all things are possible to them that believe. And again, the spoiler alert, is all things are possible is referring to spiritually speaking. It's you can now have salvation in the kingdom through believing the words of the gospel. It's not talking about getting a physical healing. You see in Mark 8 that the physical healing wasn't so important to Jesus. The one miracle that he did that we read was giving sight to a blind man. If all he was concerned about was giving physical healing, he would have just said, as he'd done many other times before, he would have just healed the man. He says, you're healed, and that's a done deal, and he could see completely. But instead, he takes the man, blind man, leads him by the hand, leads him out of town, and heals him in a two-step process to show it takes two comings for Jesus to bring sight to the blind, to give spiritual healing to the lost sheep of the house of Israel as a whole. So, even when Jesus does a physical miracle here, the emphasis is still on the spiritual lesson that they are to learn behind the physical miracle. It's not something for us today to say, oh, well, you just didn't have enough faith that first time, so you got to really hunker down and really don't waver, and don't doubt, and be sure you're strong in the faith, and then you'll get healed. You can see from the context, it's not at all what it's talking about. It's a sign of Israel's apostasy, and then how they come out of it in the two-step process of Jesus' first coming, and then going through the tribulation period with the Holy Ghost, and then finally having full sight, spiritually speaking, restored to them at Jesus' second coming when their sins are forgiven. Dear Lord, we just thank you for giving us the Holy Ghost to teach us these things of God. What a blessing it is that we have such treasures of wisdom and knowledge in your word, that you would entrust it to the simple as us, who just come to your word and believe it. Whereas the world with their philosophies, you hide those deep spiritual truths from them because they want glory in themselves without any glory going to you. So we thank you that you would entrust us with these treasures. Help us to not take them for granted, but help us to believe what they say and allow Christ to live in us. We thank you for that in Jesus' name. Amen.